Hello, and welcome to Under Your Feet, my weekly episodes about places in Manchester that have been largely forgotten, and that I've worked on or learnt about when I worked as an archaeologist. These episodes are in addition to my weekly true stories of Manchester's dark and sometimes mysterious past. When walking around modern cities, most people largely have no idea what still lies beneath their feet. This week, we start with Hanging Ditch in Manchester's medieval quarter. This area was once an island. The River Irwell on one side and the River Irk on the other create an L shape, with the two rivers connecting again, making a natural post-glacial channel, which was 11 metres wide and over 2 metres deep. With the natural topography and the geological conditions, this made it a favourable location for a prehistoric settlement. It's also known there was a Bronze Age Brigantes settlement in this location of what is now Chetham's School and Library, as there have been finds of Bronze Age metalwork, a Bronze Age dagger and a fragment of a Bronze Age axe, which were recovered from deposits in Hanging Ditch. Both were recovered in digging works in the 1880s. There is evidence of a second ditch which was man-made, which is dated from the Iron Age, which is found running through the grounds of Chetham's School, which is possibly the boundary of the Celtic settlement. This is thought that the settlement later became a castle built by Albert de Grelly, who died in about 1181. This would have been a square Norman keep design, which would have been mostly timber with a wooden palisade and defensive ditches. This is later pulled down and a manor house was built. This was first documented in 1267. These buildings were refurbished in the 1650s as Chetham's Hospital and Library, which now stand as Chetham's School and Library. It is believed Hanging Ditch was redug in the medieval period, and a stone bridge was built replacing a wooden one, which is listed as a scheduled monument. The Hanging Ditch dates back to 1421. It was originally built to link the cathedral to the town centre, which is where Cathedral Yard, Cat Eaton Street and Selfridges stand today. During this period, St Anne's Square was located just outside the town and was known as Acres Field, where livestock was kept and fairs were held. The red sandstone, which is the local Manchester bedrock and what the medieval bridge is constructed from, was lost because of the overcrowding and dumping of waste. The ditch became so polluted it had to be filled in for the public's health. It was forgotten about until it was rediscovered during the excavations in 1880, when it became a curiosity of the Victorian age, and it attracted 32,000 paying visitors within the first 3 months of it opening. But then, the Hanging Ditch Bridge was covered again during the expansion of the city centre, with it being rediscovered for a second time more than a century later, when after an archaeological excavation it was unveiled in 2002. As part of the interior for the visitor centre. The excavation brought to light pottery, bone, wood, metal and a considerable quantity of leatherwork, which became the largest quantity of medieval material found in Manchester. The visitor centre is unfortunately no longer open, but you can still see one of the arches of the bridge today if you stand next to the statue of Gandhi. Most people believe Hanging Ditch got its name because it was a place where they used to hang people, and although this might be possible, it's more likely the name comes from the wooden bridge, which was previously on this site, which was suspended over the ditch and was removable, as in a hanging bridge, much like a drawbridge. However, it's also been suggested that the name comes from an Old Saxon word either describing the ditch or water birds within, but this isn't certain. Next is New Bailey Prison. New Bailey Prison was one of the first reformed prisons and the blueprint for most modern prisons. Being commissioned by the Sheriff of Lancashire, Thomas Butterworth Bailey, after whom the site was named, and it was christened New in 1787 to distinguish it from London's Old Bailey, the prison was used for minor offences rather than capital crimes, accommodating initially 150 inmates, but gained over 2,100. The first jail was a square enclosure surrounded by a boundary wall, within which there was prison gardens, jailers' building and a gatekeeper's lodge. The prison was expanded in around 1816 to the west. 4 structures were added, housing the male felon workshops, the yards and their distinctive curved plan, the male felon wards, a cookhouse and a hospital. In the workshops they would be given tasks such as making and fixing things, such as unpicking rope. There were further phases of expansions, including the addition of the western half of the complex, of a turnkey's office, clerk's office and a new chapel. This is where none of the inmates could see or touch each other. Instead, they were led into a box where they would stick their head through a hole, so all the priest would see would be a room full of heads in boxes. In the eastern part of this site, the original prison building was partially demolished to make way for the construction of the treadwheel. This was back-breaking work, where the inmate would jump on these moving boards of a big wheel that would be constantly moving, grinding dyed wood for 10 hours a day, or just driving thin air. They also added stables, a mill house, a block for male misdemeanours, workshops and yards, where inmates would do hand loom weaving, winding bobbins, wool picking, rope making. Prisoners were allowed to keep 1/6 of their earnings, which was given to them on release. They also built a block for female felon workshops and wards. New Bailey Prison dominated the banks of the River Irwell, but as the local population rocketed in the white heat of Industrial Revolution, prison population also soared, putting pressure on the site's aspirational intentions and ultimately forcing it to compromise on its vision of reform. With hard time and execution and massive overcrowding, this was not a place you wanted to be. I have mentioned the New Bailey a few times in my dark stories that I post on Wednesdays, as it housed many murderers due to be executed. A few famous criminals, minor crimes like that of Manchester's future mayor Abel Haywood, jailed for 4 months in 1832 for refusing to pay a fine for selling an unstamped newspaper, and of course the holding and hanging of the Manchester martyrs. Dangerously overcrowded but hemmed in by the fruits of industrialisation, with 2 men in a cell, too small to lie down in, so you'd need to sleep sat up with your back against the wall, and each group of cells had a day room in between them, where the inmates would have been fed, and where they would have been led daily to the small workhouses and to the walled exercise yard. The New Bailey was unable to expand, and in 1866 a new prison was built in Manchester at Strangeways, an area which gave the name to the prison. And the prisoners were transferred there, and in some time in 1868 it seems the New Bailey prison closed. There is also said to be tunnels running from the river to the prison, around where the Mark Addy is. Prisoners would be taken from the river through the tunnels to the prison, so that the prisoners couldn't escape or be rescued. Today, the cells and day rooms are under the New Bailey car park, and funnily enough, HMRC's offices sit on the site where the gallows stood, and where the hanged prisoners, like the Manchester martyrs, were first buried. Also, it seems somewhat ironic that for being known as a progressive prison, it incarcerated several members from the crowd of the Peterloo Massacre in 1819. Finally, I'll talk about Chapel Street, which is now new apartments, but in 1230 it was part of the historic medieval core of Salford, which was arranged around 3 pinnacle streets: Greengate, Chapel Street and Gravel Lane, where on Chapel Street medieval houses were burgage plots, which are long thin plots of land which were enclosed with a boundary, and some of these plots had a dwelling on, whilst others were just used for horticulture, so that's growing your own fruit and veg and maybe some livestock too. A survey in 1346 indicated there were about 129 burgage plots in Salford, which were held by 52 individuals. I was part of the excavations which took place here, and we found a good amount of slipware pottery in a boundary ditch. Later on this spot, the Phillips Wood and Lee Cotton Twist Mill was one of the very first mills built in Salford in 1793. This was located between Chapel Street and the River Irwell, so where the Lowry Hotel stands. The mill was ahead of the times and innovated the use of gas lamp lighting, which they extended outside to the street lamps on Chapel Street itself, making it the first street in the world to be lit by gas. The mill was taken over by the Manchester Bonding Warehouse Company, and during World War II it was filled with all types of bottled alcohol, stored in crates, and when the Germans dropped incendiary bombs, the building turned into a firestorm, and they ended up pushing the building in on itself. So during the excavations, myself and other archaeologists, we had to watch out for bombs. We didn't find any, but we did find lots of crates packed with straw, some singed, but they still had bottles of champagne, whiskey, wine, and many others. There was still liquid in them. A few bottles had popped the corks due to the intense heat, but a lot was still okay. It was a crazy thing to find, to be honest. Well, that will do for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Under Your Feet, giving you an idea of what lies below while you walk along minding your own business. If there is anywhere you want me to look at, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out my dark, true, mysterious stories out on Wednesdays. Thank you for your support, and take care.